Let me just take a very brief moment to introduce our speaker, Jim Mather. Jim came to politics relatively late after a distinguished career in business in a number of sectors in the Scottish economy, including the high-tech sector. He's worked for IBM in Scotland, been the manager of a major computer franchise, retail franchise in Scotland, is by profession an accountant, but has worked in management consulting, and is well-versed in all of the branches of Scottish industry and services, knows the Scottish economy extraordinarily well, represents an area called Highlands and Islands in the Scottish Parliament, as again a member of the SNP. Jim has been a good friend of BYU and has helped, especially with his colleague Brian Adam from the SNP, making sure our interns have a good experience in Edinburgh. Today he's going to talk about a subject near and dear to his heart, which is called the economics of Scottish independence. Without any further ado, I'd like to give you Jim Mather. Thank you. Thank you.
We'll start off, folks, by just putting the geography in context. So you know what we're talking about. Britain and its constituent parts in association with Ireland is where I'm from. Today we're going to be talking about Scotland. I've put London in there in particular because one of the key things and one of the key points I'll make in the course of this discussion with you is that we have got one centre of economic growth in the UK, one centre that attracts most of the wealth, whereas in the States you've got this wonderful dynamic of each state having its own economic identity and able to maintain a balance that we sadly don't have. But I'll develop that as we go forward. Focus is on Scotland, and in essence, I'm keen to put Scotland in context. It's an ancient nation, an old country. 1320 is a kind of key date for us because that was the declaration of Arbroath. Key correlation between the declaration of Arbroath in 1320, which had the basic premise that sovereignty lay with the people, and 1776. I could go on at that at some considerable length, but there is a commonality in ideas and concepts there. 1603 saw us join up with the UK in terms of a shared king. James VI of Scotland became James I of England, and that kind of started the rot because a few years later we had in 1707 the union of the parliaments at a time when only one person in Scotland out of 1,000 had the vote, and the two dynamics were at work. There was a major element of bribery and a considerable military threat if that parliament didn't come through and join up. As I say, no universal franchise at that time and a key military threat. Financial inducement, most of the guys that signed up to it were well compensated for their signatures. 1999, it all changes. 1999, we have a Scottish Parliament again, and when that Parliament was opened in 1st of May 1999, it was opened by a speaker who was the oldest person, the oldest elected member, one of our members, Winifred Ewing, and Winifred Ewing said, "The Scottish Parliament, which adjourned 25th March 1707, is hereby reconvened." And that continues to strike a chord with me. But Scotland, I'm keen to put Scotland, before we talk to the details of what I've got to say to you today, in some kind of relevance for you and yours. I think clearly with Dodd here today, you can see that the shared roots are there, and these roots go deep. The specific deliverables for you today, I'm keen to say that we give you a chance to understand the similarities between where we are at now and where you were in 1776, and I hope to prove that in a moment or two. Help you understand perhaps how some of your founding brothers felt about the issues as they saw them in the day. Understand our non-violent constitutional evolution. I mean, Scotland is unique. We want to change Scotland, we want it to be independent, but we're not doing it with Semtex or bullets. And I'll give you a clear understanding, I hope, of the real issues that Scotland faces just now, and allow you to audit, scrutinise, and leave some time for questioning so that I can throw myself through the rigours of that. But the parallels between us are massive. You know, people migration, some of the people with the handcarts that came to Salt Lake City in 1843 were Scots. 300 years of agreement and disagreement. We've had our fallouts, but the key thing always is we pack together when times are tough. And the philosophy and ideas, that Declaration of Independence, there's a new book been written by Professor Edward Cowan of Glasgow University called For Freedom Alone, which essentially makes this link and is well worth having a look at. I'm sure the members of our Enlightenment influenced yours. We got a lot of payback from that. We still get payback from the avalanche of people like Peters, Porter, Pinker and others who make us think a bit more clearly. But the similarities between 1776 and 2004 are really quite interesting. I mean, in 1760, you'd seen off the French jointly with the British, same as we've seen off the Germans and the Russians in the Cold War, in the Second World War and the Cold War. We've got a parliament, but I would suggest it was a bit like what you've got, or we had in 1776, pretty ineffective talking shop, very limited powers. We're angry about unfair taxes, mainly imposed through London, and I'll talk about that in some detail later on. We're very angry about London controlling our destiny, and we're very angry about the flow of wealth and people and decision-making and profits to London. And like you in Lexington, when the first shot was fired in Lexington, only 30% of Americans supported independence. At the moment, our number is about 38%. And I think there's an argument here that says in any steady state, whether it's a country or a corporation, you're going to have 30% of people eager to go for it, 30% of people quite happy the way things are, and 40% in the middle, apathetic, ignorant, not engaging with the argument. And that's the key thing that we're trying to fix. And we're trying to fix that through the vehicle of focusing on these key issues. Our economy in Scotland is nothing like as strong as it could and should be. Our population is falling. The demographic skew is going very badly against us. By 2043, we lose 550,000 of the 3.15 million economically active people in Scotland. We've got huge untapped potential, and one thing, sure as anything, I want to maintain is the unique voice of Scotland that has brought us the Enlightenment and other aspects in the past. But, this is where I move somewhat Clinton-esque. It's about the economy, and everything else has to be subservient to the economy. And we have got a big job in our hands that we're spending our life, our time in the Parliament, making sure that the people of Scotland understand why Scotland needs the power to compete and why the economy matters. And that's pretty simple. I mean, in a normal country, normal national policy objectives are about generating competitiveness for the country, promoting economic growth, attracting investment in. And the reason countries do that are to get normal outcomes, like having decent levels of government revenues, boosting over time the life expectancy of its citizens, and seeing balanced population growth. And the normal personal objectives that fuels are the ability to give solid, perhaps growing, quality living standards, opportunity for individuals, and the promotion of solid self-esteem that again feeds back into the investment model. Now, in Scotland at the moment, this engine is somewhat flawed, because the situation we've got just now is we're very much a branch economy, and I'll explain to you why that is, with no top-level objectives for growth or population size, or even things like life expectancy. Our competitiveness is declining. In a recent study by IMD of Switzerland, Scotland came out 36th out of 60 in terms of competitiveness in a basket of 60 developed nations and regions. And what was also interesting in that same study, the UK came out 22nd. So the idea that there's a level playing field in Scotland is a complete fallacy, with other hungry countries like Estonia coming in at 28th. So there's a competitiveness issue in Scotland. We've had 40 years of low economic growth, and I'll explain that in detail shortly. And we've got a situation, therefore, where government revenues are perpetually under threat. We've got the lowest life expectancy in the EU. We were the 8th highest in the 1950s, 14th highest in the late 70s, been bottom since the 1990s in life expectancy, and the population, as I mentioned, is in decline. Net effect of that, living standards, a big gap between our living standards and living standards in the rest of the UK and the rest of Europe, and also an internal widening gap between rich and poor in Scotland. Suboptimal opportunities and a real problem with self-esteem in certain income groups and with certain elements of our younger people. So in essence, all of that does not feed into proper investment, and we've seen a collapse of foreign investment over that piece. And what's coupled with that recently is we've had a survey from the Federation of Small Business in Scotland that's essentially saying Scotland is pretty much down the pecking order in terms of developed economies, and in terms of small nations, countries under 9 million, really doing pretty badly. And what is ironic for us is that the measures that they used to evaluate this were all measures that we felt gilded the lily, showed the thing in a better light, because gross domestic product per capita, when you've got a falling population and you're a branch economy, is really not as significant as they chose to look at it. Educational attainment is important, but it is not a valuable measure if you're exporting the best and brightest from your society. And labour market participation is only valid if we're dealing with firm numbers, whereas we've got a government that has essentially underestimated the population of economically active people. And even in the life expectancy measure, which we were bottom of the 24 countries, it is boosted by affluent people retiring back to Scotland, who tend to live longer. So in essence, we've got a pretty comprehensive charge sheet in Scotland. We've got a low rate in the IMD competitiveness ranking. We've got a government with no powers to borrow, tax or save. We've no forecast of economic growth, so our competitors can say this government is not serious about economic growth. We've got a forecast that we lose substantial numbers of people over time. The low economic growth has been endemic for 30 years. Our only palliative of late is to bring foreign investment that has not done much research and development, and therefore been very liable to move offshore to the Czech Republic, to Poland, etc. We've got economic development as a government top priority, but getting a falling share of government budget in terms of fueling that. And we have an annual exercise called Government Expenditure and Revenue Scotland that tends to show Scotland as being dependent on the UK in a bid to create fear, uncertainty and doubt and prevent working people having the courage to go on their own. On top of that, unemployment deeply understated, and implicit government assumption of a zero-sum game. So when you suggest we could run our own economy, we could be better, the rejoinder is, which hospital are you going to close, which university are you going to cut back on? So that's the position that we've got looking into Scotland. And in that climate, it is not a surprise that Scottish financial autonomy is now supported by a majority of members of the Scottish Parliament on a free vote, let me tell you. That doesn't always happen. And that the real consensus now is on the economy, and that consensus is coming from a very broad range of opinion, from economists, from business leaders. We've even got the Scottish Council Development Industry calling for a royal commission to look at financial autonomy for Scotland. And we've got a pattern here of people leaving public office, and in that freedom of leaving public office, coming out in favour of looking for more power for the Scottish Parliament. And the key thing is that when you look at the background of Scotland during my lifetime, Scotland, its recent industrial history breaks into three distinct phases. When I was a boy, it was heavy engineering and agriculture and immigration. As I was growing up, it was foreign direct investment and immigration. Now we're in the knowledge economy, and we've got the call centres, and we've got immigration big time. You know, the best and brightest of Scottish universities are leaving Scotland to have their careers elsewhere. A former Scottish office official told me that Scotland, however, 30 years ago, with Scottish Development Agency, Highlands and Islands Development, had the best economic development agencies in the Western world, the most money, the most motivated people. But when we look at the data, it's as though these organisations never happened. And the regional policy that brought us IBM and Compaq, DEC, Hewlett-Packard, etc., has been a two-edged sword as these companies have consolidated and moved offshore. Our comparison with other countries is pretty invidious. We've got Nokia, one company in Finland, spending more on research and development than all of Scotland. We've got Ireland growing at an average at the moment of about 4 to 4.5%. and Ireland brilliantly positioning itself as the only English-speaking country in the Eurozone, therefore holding up its foreign investment where ours flounders and falls. Nevertheless, there is for Scotland an enormous 21st century opportunity. And the big issue for us is, are we going to seize it or lose it? Do we have the will to do anything about it? And the key point behind this is that we've got the ability, the attributes to be a very wealthy country. We have got an international brand. One of the recent studies said that Scotland is one of 15, 16 countries on the planet with a strong international brand. You know, it's historical happen chance, but because of tartan, bagpipes, whiskey, golf, whatever, we have this brand. The brand is there. But more importantly, the same study shows that we have the fantastic international reputation. Now, it's not the one we thought we had, one of inventiveness that we had at the turn of the 19th century, but it's every bit as good in the knowledge economy. It's a reputation for integrity and reliability, and that can most certainly be built on. We've got great people. We've got a fantastic location on the cusp of Europe. We've got a terrific environment, a few urban black spots, but by and large, a great environment. And we've got fantastic natural resources. And in essence, this is a key point of deviation from the Scottish National Party's previous proposition, which said we can run Scotland marginally better than the Unionist parties and use oil as icing on the cake. What we are now saying is we can run Scotland materially better and use oil the way the Norwegians have done to create an oil fund for future generations to build their infrastructure, balance their country, and build the skills in their own people. But the key thing is we're not an overheated economy, the very opposite. And we've got a reservoir of recent emigrants, first and second, third generation Scots, as well as others who could come back and play a part in Scotland, provided they weren't being asked to discount their salaries, their career potential, the houses they live in. And these people can play a part in leveraging this fantastic brand. I mean, Scotland has got 5 global companies, for which we're very grateful to have 5 global companies, but Catalonia, one province in Spain, has got 100 global companies. So there's a huge potential for Scotland. And the potential is latent at the moment, because when you look at economic growth over the last 30 years in Scotland, it shows categorically a very different position. We've grown on average over the last 30 years at 1.62% per annum, compared to 2.1 for the UK, 2.5 for the EU, and 4%, probably closer to 5% for Ireland. But the key thing is, even if we'd kept up with the UK, even if the UK had been a level playing field, we would notionally have £10 billion more sterling flowing through the Scottish economy, and a notional tax take of an extra £4 billion to spend on our schools, our universities, our hospitals, our transport infrastructure. And the key lesson we've learned, and this has taken the SNP from being a party of the left to a party of the centre, is this key notion that higher growth means a higher tax take and reduced dependency. And what we've now got is the experience over the last 10 years of Sweden, Finland, Austria, Greece, Portugal, and Ireland in spades, where they have dramatically reduced the rate of corporation tax and seen the total tax take increase hugely. But the component of that tax take that was corporation tax increased by 87% on average in that period. So you'll understand, being in Utah, being able to talk last night to the Ocher Institute, home of Arthur Laffer, who's got the patent on the Laffer curve that says take this tax rate down and watch the tax take up, is very poignant for me. The key thing about it is, when you look at the latest data, non-oil gross domestic product by head sees Scotland by the end of 2003 not having caught up with where the UK was in 1996. This is on per capita basis. Now, if I'd brought the Irish data here, I would have plotted a line that went through both the red line and the green line. If I had the data for London and the South East, this hotspot in the UK, I would require a bigger graph, a larger scale, and you would have seen a wider gap opening up. And the key point we're making is, as long as you treat Scotland as a branch economy and apply uniform tax rates from London, and I'll talk more about that in a minute, this gap will just widen. And the key thing about it is, if I put my fingernails behind that and peel it off and look at the graph for employment, the graph for population, average incomes, average house prices, new car registrations, the same gap is opening up. Scotland is getting poorer relative to the UK in the current union. Now, I've said a lot of fairly depressing things today about Scotland, and yet I'm incredibly optimistic about Scotland. And what I'm now going to do is use yet another American as our way out of this, you know, our roadmap out. And we've lent very heavily on the work of an American Israeli called Eli Goldratt. And Goldratt has developed a theory called the theory of constraints. He's written about 8, 10 best-selling books, all of them wonderful, exceedingly readable. Developed a cadre of consultants. And what Goldratt says is when you're faced with a very difficult, complex problem, what you do is you get the team together, you get the flip chart stand up, and you say, right, if we want to try and solve, let's say, Scotland's population problem, tell me what are the factors, the undesirable effects that are getting in the way of that happening. And then he says, list them all, get them all on the flip chart, and then translate each of them onto a separate piece of paper and put them on a large table and move them around the table until you've got a cause and effect diagram. This one causes these 2 problems, and this one here causes these 3. And then have the team agree which is the sorest thumb, which is the core problem. And at that point in time, then implement some discipline, and the discipline being to solve the core problem first, fix that, and don't fix the easy ones. So in a Scottish context, I told you we were being Clinton-esque and understanding that there are lots of problem areas, but we're going to focus on the economy first and foremost. And what we've got here is the proposition that the limited power of the Scottish Parliament is in fact the core problem, because that limited power means that we've got the same tax rates in remote parts of Scotland as in central London, and as I'll show you in a minute, some of them actually marginally higher. And we've seen pretty much the collapse of foreign direct inward investment, just a fraction of what's happened in previous years, whilst Ireland's investment is held up through competitive tax rates and being the only English-speaking country in the Eurozone. But beyond this, with limited powers and a branch economy, it makes it impossible to overcome the gravitational pull of London. I mean, this state, every state in the Union, is able to overcome the gravitational pull of New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, etc. In London, in the UK, London means higher growth, better prospects for individuals, and the reasons are quite straightforward. In London, easier access to funds for start-up companies and growth companies, the high-ticket prestige advisors that can open doors, take you public, make you wealthier there. Heavyweight government is there, the UK ministers are there, the civil servants are there that are there to be lobbied and influenced. The majority of our head offices are there. The mass of our affluent consumers are there, so if you want to get a product started, best to start it down there. London allowances, higher salaries, training, promotion chances make London the key pool of labour. It's also the transport hub, if you want to cover the UK from a sales and marketing standpoint. The media hub is based there, and if you want to be global, there is really no choice. You know, you've got. I usually flying abroad have to fly out through an English airport, but beyond that, Scotland has got no power to compete on tax. And now the formula that gives us the money from Westminster with which we pay our health, our transport, etc., is being squeezed because it's population-based, and if your population falls, you get less money. And some taxes, local taxes, are actually perversely higher in Scotland. Property business rates, water rates, the climate change levy bites harder in a colder climate, etc., etc. So therefore, we can build this model that says, with interest rates too high and never too low for Scotland, fuel, in spite of being an oil-producing country, fuel being most expensive in Europe, an exchange rate that damages our manufacturing and tourism because it's geared to the City of London, a low share of government spending in areas like defence, weak branding of Scotland, poor transport infrastructure, too many exports going out through English harbours and English airports. We've got low growth, perennial, factual, low growth over 30 years. But if you've got low growth and there's only 5 million of you, you occupy a low rung on the European wealth ladder in absolute size of the economy and in per capita terms. And that means that Scottish companies are undervalued. They're undervalued because it's more difficult to get capital, their customers have got shallower pockets, they compete with a bigger competitor. Therefore, over the piece, gradually, being a branch economy means you lose your head offices. That means the talented young people in Scotland have got to go elsewhere to have full career fulfilment. That gives us a long-term skill shortage. And when you lose head offices, rarely do you have a high level of research and development spend or a big service sector. And when companies are undervalued and sold, rarely is that money reinvested. So we have a low business birth rate, which reinforces this model. Now, this model has now lasted 4 years been presented to most of our political opponents. None of them lay a glove on it on account of the fact it's true and stacks up with the facts and is not anecdotal. Imagine this case study where in 1945 Vermont accepts a union with Massachusetts, and the terms of that deal is that Massachusetts sets uniform rates at the Massachusetts rates for both states, collects 85% of taxes other than local taxes into Boston, pays the good people of Vermont an annual allowance to cover their necessary expenses, and the net effect in Vermont is lower economic growth for years, poor health, declining population, diminishing sense of identity, and talented people migrating away. I don't think they would put up with it. In fact, we had an American, a chap called William Baumol, emeritus professor from Princeton, came across, and I asked him this very question, and he'd been brought across by the government to present to us and tell us that the formula we had of funding was a good deal and we should lie back and enjoy it. But being an American, I didn't require a truth drug with the man. I asked him if this was the deal here, would he advocate it to the good folks of Vermont? And he said no. As an American, I'd advise the folk in Vermont to stand on their own 2 feet. And then he turned across and looked at his hostess and said, but as a guest in your country, I guess I'll just take the Fifth Amendment, which was good enough for us. And luckily it was on television and it was broadcast as that. So another academic maintaining his integrity intact. So it allows us to paraphrase Thomas Jefferson and say, look, if we stick with this formula for funding Scotland that's based on population and is going to squeeze the same rates of taxes and profits in faraway Stornoway up in the Western Isles compared to the central London and higher local taxes, you cannot possibly transform the Scottish economy. It cannot be done. And that is now getting increasing acceptance. And essentially what we're saying is the same core problem about the economy impacts people. If you've got lower growth, you have much higher unemployment, more part-time work, more short-term contracts, more difficult to get self-employment off the ground to stay viable. People on lower incomes because they're on minimum wage, they're on benefits, they're in subsistence self-employment, and this whole plethora of negative effects play through the declining population and the unlikeliness of attracting proper levels of investment. And again, this model is accepted. And the proof came in a series of lectures last winter where we had a guy from London School of Economics called Nicholas Crafts, who's given full credit on the bottom of this slide that you cannot see. And Nicholas Crafts said, as I said earlier, in 1950, Scotland had the 8th highest life expectancy in Western Europe. 1976, 14th. 1990, bottom, still bottom. And he said, but if you could bring your meagre life expectancy up just to the UK level, you would increase your GDP by 21.3%. Tells me 2 things. 1, our analysis is absolutely right. And 2, we are being fed rubbish in terms of government statistics on the likes of GDP. We're being sold a pup. Very reassuring. So our ambition is to have the bottom word here, which would get me into trouble back home, that is missing, is independence. It says full financial independence, but believe me, it's there. If we turn that screw to full financial independence, have a discrete economy that turns all of these to a more competitive hue, that creates a gravitational pull, a compelling need to come to Scotland, to be in Scotland, that gives us added value foreign direct inward investment that's not based on grants, on cheap loans, on rent support for property, on low wages, but bringing people to make profits, to see them increase in value, to see a growth of companies. Then we create a model that is the American model, the Irish model, the Czech model, the model that works, the normal model. It's not a big aspiration, and that's clearly what we aspire to have. And the beauty of this, in taking my party that had a left-of-centre position to the centre, we've done that by persuading them we can address the social issues, not so much by direct action alone, but by making the economic cake considerably bigger. And by doing that the way that we know to revitalise this Parliament by giving it a proper set of powers, allowing us to have a genuine enterprise economy and meaningful targets that would see us match Danish living standards, allow us to have more people participate in prosperity and create a whole new level of self-reliance. I mean, the simple mechanism that we're seeing happening now across all of Europe, which is more money coming in taxes, less money going out in benefits, more money available for public services, and the public services available to start orienting themselves not to solve problems, but to invest in developing infrastructure and human capital. And that is clearly the model that we favour. And that, of course, means putting strategic objectives in terms that people understand, not just the 30% that are enthusiastic, but the 40% that are there to be persuaded. And putting dry topics like economic growth in terms that resonate with people. And also addressing the key issue of our population decline on the basis that we don't move the population numbers forward and fix the demographic problem, then the prospect of retaining existing services and infrastructure goes out the window, let alone the prospect of improving it. The big shame for Scotland just now, and the shame for our current government, is in terms of macro targets, there are none. And that tells us pretty much, I think, everything. This is my flight simulator. And this is what I anticipate should be on the desk of every leader of every country. This is what I like to see on the desk of Jack McConnell, the First Minister of Scotland. All the controls here at the bottom that you need to run a balanced economy, the two-way traffic of public spending and tax revenues, the ability to sit and over time adjust these controls so that you optimize the readings on employment, on population, on economic growth, etc. The sad fact for Scotland is that the flight simulator on Jack McConnell's desk has got most of the controls either financially questionable, or we simply wouldn't trust our local government in the current shape it's in to collect and spend high levels of taxes. The block grant comes in to fund the Scottish state. The majority of taxes go straight to Westminster for them to reallocate. And the chances of us getting optimal readings on these indicators at the top are a function of how strong the tow rope is between us and the UK economy, us and the European economy, us and the United States economy. And really, it also says that whatever readings we get on them, because we're on a tow rope, because that tow rope is lengthening, then those readings will be suboptimal compared to those that are actually doing the pulling. The good news for Scotland is there are factors at work that make Scottish independence inevitable. Those factors are all the things I'm putting up here: time, education, public opinion, case studies, more population decline, confidence, diaspora pressure. You know, the pressure that could come from you guys to say, why are you sitting on your thumbs? Why are you behaving like the cargo cult, hoping that something comes up? Why are you indulging in a false hope syndrome that something that's failed for 40 years is all of a sudden going to work? But it's, in essence, at the end of the day, it's going to be demand. And the indications are there that that demand is coming. 66% of people in Scotland want more power. 46% of the business community want more power, with 26% neutral. And the key issue for us is, therefore, in summary, the economic conditions are not right. Given that the economic conditions are not right, we've had low growth, not a blip, low growth for 30 years. As a result of that, we've had a wealth gap, an income gap, a population gap, an employment gap. That's boxed in our ability to have good economic social consequences. The solution means addressing the core problem. That means bolting on financial independence, allowing us to have an enterprise economy, to get out there and follow, undercut, compete with role model countries, and earn our way to prosperity and better social outcomes. And we believe this is a winning argument, and I'm now happy to take any questions you've got to challenge me on this. So thanks for listening. Thank you.
One of the things that faculty members in political science spend a lot of time doing is trying to persuade students to make arguments. You know, don't be neutral, don't describe things. We got plenty of people who can describe things. Pick up an encyclopedia, it'll describe things. Or make an argument. Tell me what I should think. And Jim, you're going to have to work on being more passionate about your cause. No, you can take a lot of lessons from Jim Mather and the way he marshals claims and backs them with evidence and weaves the whole thing together. I have now transformed this ordinary-looking microphone into one that actually will pick up your voice, and we're recording this session, as we always do in the Kennedy Center. So even though you feel like you can be heard, if you would please speak into the microphone to ask your question, that'll allow us to pick up the question and then let Jim take the answer. So I'll work the microphone, and you tell me who to give it to, Jim. How's that?
Right, okay, let's do it then. Let's see a hand. There's a hand there in the corner.
Stuck right into it? Yeah. Oh, very good. My concern about your presentation is, are you a lone man on the hill? Are there other people who share your feelings in this presentation? until you get enough momentum,
Sure.
how likely is change going to happen?
The good news is I'm no lone man on the hill. This government didn't treat economic growth seriously 4 years ago. The enterprise minister resigned because of that. Because of this presentation, this argument, we've now got them treating economic growth as their top priority. Without a forecast, but it's a top priority. I think that's progress. And what we're doing is we're basing our plans, our activity very much on the work of Malcolm Gladwell. He's written this wonderful book, Tipping Point. And Tipping Point says 3 things. First, get a sticky, contagious idea, and we have. Second, talk to influential people, and we do. And third, talk to as many people as possible through as many vehicles as possible. Talks to TV, in the chamber, letters to the press, articles to the press, etc. And we're doing it. This is an argument that will not go away. Yeah.
Jim, it seems like every day I become more aware of expatriates from Scotland, third, fourth, 10th generation Americans, but from Scotland, who own, run, CEOs of companies here in America, and who seem to be proud of their heritage, Malcolm Forbes and others. Are any of these American companies interested in the direction that the SNP and Parliament seems to want to go?
The answer to that is yes, but I think the difficulty we've always had is coming to the States with a partisan proposition is always difficult. The well's been kind of poisoned by NORAID, I think, in the past, and despite the fact that we are committed to debate and the ballot box to move things forward, it has been difficult. What we're doing is, whilst there's this polluting experience from Ireland, there's also a very positive experience from Ireland in the shape of the Ireland Funds, which was a charity that was set up and had a hugely beneficial effect beyond the direct charitable influence. Ireland Fund starts in 1976 by Tony O'Reilly. In 1986, surprise, surprise, Ireland's getting kind of pragmatic, sharpening its pencil, opening its doors, canning protectionism, moving to away from a tax and spend era. We've now, on a cross-party basis, launched the Scotland funds. So whereas previously, Kip Forbes might have held us at arm's length, I think those days are about to change dramatically. And essentially what we're doing is a recognition that those in power in Scotland who favour the Union are really as much as anything favouring their current power position, etc., and will lock horns with us forever as long as they stay in power. Therefore, by emulating the Ireland funds, activating the diaspora, we open a second front and we bring an element of scrutiny that I think will make it unsustainable. And it's back to my IBM experience. In IBM, we could bring the local branch expert on IMS, the database system of the time, to see Standard Life and Royal Bank of Scotland, treated with disdain. The regional guy, treated a bit better. The national guy from the UK, treated a little bit better. But we brought the guy from Palo Alto, treated like a demigod. So we're expecting you guys to have this effect on our country.
You talked about financial independence, but does this mean an actual break with the UK as not being part of the UK anymore? And do you have a target that you've established for when you want this to happen?
Sure, that's a great question. We have no plans to move the tectonic plates, that's for starters. I think the classic line is that when Scotland gets independence, England loses a surly lodger and gets a good neighbour. And we're both, as you know, in the European Union. So I think the European Union is going to be a facilitating function for that, because having lived my business life through the last 30-odd years, I've watched most of the Western European countries overtake Scotland, including Spain, that was held up in a fascist dictatorship through into 1976. Now we're seeing the new accession states coming on stream, and all of them learning the Irish lessons and building an economies that look streamlined and ready to go. We want it to happen for Scotland as soon as possible. We're building the case. The case is gaining real momentum. But we're in that difficulty that you had in Lexington, and that is only 30% really, really want it, 30% really don't want it, and the 40% in the middle that are somewhat apathetic. So we're working very hard at it. The momentum is being gained. The one thing that gives us huge increased legitimacy just now is we've got a wonderful new parliament, and a genuinely wonderful new parliament. And that Parliament, in the last session, when it was in temporary accommodation, discussed and took up parliamentary time on earth-shattering issues like dog dirt, hedge heights, falling masonry. That cannot last. That cannot last. So the impatience is there. And it's looking to this generation. I mean, the reason I'm in politics is the people I see in the wing mirrors, the ones that are coming through, that will be considerably more impatient than I am. But again, we add the weight of the diaspora to that. I mean, there's 27 million people in the States with Scots-Irish descent. That's enormous. And we start to bring that into play. And one interesting statistic, in the last 10 years, 50% more Americans classifying themselves as Scots-Americans. Looking back at the family tree, and because of Tartan Day and the Parliament and what we're doing, I like to think this is happening. So the momentum is coming, and the abnormality of Scotland's position is so total that it has to change. This gentleman, you'll go.
Thanks. Do you think that the financial independence should include a currency break? And if so, would Scotland more likely choose to join the euro than the rest of the UK is? And also, what incentive does Westminster have to support these changes?
Yeah, Westminster is a bit of a malevolent force. I mean, you look at Westminster's track record from 1921 through to 1973 vis-a-vis Ireland. It was one of constructive hostility and an attempt to break and impoverish Ireland for as long as was possible. Ireland got out the box by joining the EU and learning the pragmatic lessons and moving forward. And we would look to do the same with the EU. I mean, the euro has got downside as well as upside, but the key upside is it just takes the whole issue of exchange rates, interest rates, currency stability out of the equation. And that would be wonderful to give us that stability. And just last week in The Economist magazine, talking essentially to the Eurozone, The Economist, in a leading article at the front, essentially described the situation as being, quote unquote, a case for nationalism, on the basis that in the Eurozone, given that these folks have given up their monetary policy, so they don't control interest rates, they don't control exchange rates, they therefore must have adamantly tax powers to differentiate and protect themselves, as you have here within your state and whichever home state that is across the US. So the euro's got huge upsides for us and a huge market, and we've got one of the biggest lights under the biggest bushel, and once we come out, we'll do well. Gentleman in the front.
In terms of the Scottish representatives in the European Union, how much is there a sense of we're here to represent Scotland versus we're here to represent the UK? Is there kind of a pressure from Westminster to don't push this financial this economic independence case, just represent the UK's needs more broadly?
Sure. Right. Well, the makeup is we've got 7 in the European Parliament. 2 of them are SNP, 2 of them Conservative, 2 Labour, and 1 Liberal. I can speak for the 2 SNP guys. They're there permanently to bang the drum for us and make the case for us. It's a huge underrepresentation. If Scotland was an independent country, it would have 14, 15, 16 members of the European Parliament. We would have our turn at being president. We would sit in the commission, the whole bit. We lose that. Because of that, we've been seen, and our basic industry has been seen as a kind of bargaining chip with the UK government time after time. We lost our steel industry, our fishing industry had been absolutely ravaged through the common fisheries agreements. Scotland needs to be there on its own in its own way. The SNP are doing it just now, but we did it so well that our first MEP back in the 70s, a woman called Dr. Winifred Ewing, and she became known as Madame Ecosse. So very focused, very focused.
Can I just jump in for just a second? On the issue of EMU, I could imagine taking the course that you laid out, going into the Eurozone and saying, okay, we don't have any kind of monetary policy, and most macro policies are out of our hands now, but we're going to be very industrious with tax policy. But why not have your cake and eat it too? Why not stay out of the European Monetary Union, stay in a currency union with the UK, but have the benefit of then using aggressively your tax policies and your investment policies, but not having the disadvantage of losing all control over your monetary policy.
Yeah, I think the key thing is that the UK management of sterling has not been, essentially a role model in the period 1945 to 2000. I mean, we had 13, 14 years ago the ignominious exit from what was then the sort of putative early stage European monetary union before the euro was announced, which, thanks to freedom of information, will now cost the UK Treasury 3 billion sterling to try and shore up in a failed attempt to shore it up. So I think there's an awareness that the London financial market has got an agenda that's not in Scotland's interest. Whereas we neutralise that in Europe. I mean, what London has been doing of late is essentially beating our financial services tree to try and knock some of the rich fruit of our mutual life companies out the tree, force them into a privatised state, and then sucking them up, taking them up. So we've lost Scottish Providence, Scottish Mutual, company after company after company. Then the next one to go is Standard Life, which is huge, and would have an enormous effect on the quality of jobs, the average salaries in a major city like Edinburgh, if we were to lose the fund managers and the actuaries, and would have an enormous spin-off effect to the accountancy and legal profession that's there. I mean, Scotland is positioned with its financial services sector to be a real world power. I mean, we have got a unique legal system, a unique actuarial system, high integrity banking, high integrity auditing, quality track record in life and pensions, quality track record in fund management. Add to that the fiscal dust of independence, and we could be a real place to put a proposition to the diaspora, to the English-speaking world, to the discerning world, that Scotland is a place for your financial management, is safe, secure, liable to give you better results. I mean, it's a proposition that could readily and credibly be made.
Yeah, my question is are the issues that you're having in Scotland the same as say other parts of the UK, like Wales or Northern Ireland, those kind of things?
That's a really good question. The answer is yes, and I think that also explains why so many of our guests in the Parliament are people from Northumberland in the north of England, from Wales, from Northern Ireland, etc., and learning these lessons. And I think the movement's going to be really quite intriguing. I mean, we're sitting just now, our terms and conditions are the same as those in Northern Ireland, but the folk in Northern Ireland are right cheek by jowl, sitting right beside Ireland. And you imagine the situation where you've got both the Northern Irish and the Irish trying to attract an American company to come to Ireland. The Northern Ireland proposition is come and you'll keep 70 pence in the pound, every pound of profit. The Irish proposition is come to Ireland, you'll keep 87.5 pence in the pound, and we're the only English-speaking country in the Eurozone, so you've got no exchange rate exposure, you've got no commission charges, etc., on putting the proposition. So the case is there to be made. I think what's really interesting is that there's also one other similar case, and that is East Germany, where the Germans have unified, the West Germans have taken on the East, and in the process pumped billions of euros into the East, and seen a situation where the unions have pretty much dictated that wage rates in the East are similar to the West, and the federal government has insisted that tax rates in the East are pretty similar to the West. Net effect is that the bright and the best in the East of Germany are going to the West for their careers, to start their businesses, to implement good business ideas. The beauty of that, however, is that, with typical Teutonic efficiency, I expect them to solve it a lot quicker than we do. I mean, they've created Scotland in 12 years. It took us 300 to get into this mess. And I expect them to fix it. And again, it will be another role model to fix a situation that is badly abnormal.
My question is in regards to the economic model that you showed regarding the positive relationship of life expectancy and the GDP rise of 21%.
Yeah.
My question is, what are the SMPs doing right now to help raise the life expectancy? in Scotland? And then number two, would raising life expectancy, raising the GDP right now, help your cause for full financial independence? Would that just strengthen your cause even more?
Absolutely, it would. I think what we're in is the understanding that there's a counterintuitive issue here, and that is to fix social problems, whether it's drug abuse, teenage pregnancies, or life expectancy. It's about the economy. The stronger economy, people being able to have good jobs, to earn good wages, and to make choices. There's a wonderful doctor in Scotland recently in an area of Glasgow called Shettleston, which has the worst health in all of the UK. And this doctor made this wonderful erudite statement. He said, when people make choices, they generally make good choices. And at the moment, I think in Scotland, a lot of people are making very self-destructive choices, and that's driving down that age issue. But that comment about bring your life expectancy up to the UK level and you get this huge lift in GDP, it's based on the work of an American academic called W.D. Nordhaus from Yale, who's produced the actuarial studies that says essentially if you're keeping people alive for longer, they're working for longer, they're earning for longer, they're placing less of a heavy burden on the health service, etc. They're active people, they're progressive people, they bring up better kids, they have, the kids don't get in trouble, they go through school. The whole positive attributes that I'm seeing in places like this are there to play.